Your front-facing person needs to be technically knowledgeable. They can't just be a good salesman. They can't just have field experience. They need to be able to translate that into this is what you're getting, this is what you're not getting.
If you don't follow the code, there will be consequences, meaning, again, litigation.
So we got 2 repeat guests on, and yet the 2 seem to be still figuring out and navigating how to record their first podcast. So with that, with a continuation.
Why do we have to record our own when we have you?
There you go.
Anyway, the topic at hand today that I want to dig into is overseas manufacturing, which we've discussed a lot. And Eliot posed last time what the future looks like and what the future of domestic manufacturing looks like here stateside. And it's become rather commonplace for us to import insulated glass, especially laminated glass, and all different types of makeups for a host of different reasons. Challenges of fabricating different configurations, just lower cost overall, the availability of triple glazing in heated dominated climates. But if you take that a step further now, we're still going to need domestic glazing contractors. Obviously, we need boots on the ground. But when looking at the assembly as a whole, including the accessories and the extrusions, what that means for importing whole assemblies versus components. And, I think Eliot has some strong opinions on the topic and sees a lot of different manufacturers on site and in his facility, and can really give a lot of insight as to where the market is headed. And then I think Manny gives a very unique perspective in his respective market, given the constraints and availability of certain manufacturers that can even comply with the local requirements. So why don't we kind of let Eliot start to share some of his initial thoughts as to what he's seen within the past 5 years, and then if it's really accelerated in the past 6 to 9 months or so.
So thanks, Adrian. So yes, definitely in the last year and a half, we've seen imports from Europe and Asia accelerate like mad. We've seen, I think it's coincided with or really grew after we saw the consolidation of the domestic companies. So we saw large companies buying up a lot of small companies, and that entrepreneurial led company disappearing in the aluminum and glass industry, right? The people who started these companies 30 to 50 years ago were all retiring. They all saw the opportunity to sell out to one of the biggies, whether it's Oldcastle or Apogee or any of the other names that we can think of quickly, and took their opportunity for their golden parachute and left the company in the hands of people who don't know it that well, and maybe don't even know the industry that well, to be honest, because I see a lot of decisions. This year, we're going to lose Warsaw as an entity. There'll still be products that have the name Warsaw on them, but we won't have the company that we've known for a very long time as the ultimate, highly engineered, highly capable manufacturer of aluminum and glass fenestration. And that makes me extremely sad and concerned about what's happening in our industry, because even though that was a large corporation for a long time, owned by a conglomerate, I think the fact that they are closing it means that the larger corporations don't have confidence in our ability in the United States and Canada to do custom engineered work effectively and maintain margins. And that's scary in a way, because the easiest stuff for people overseas to do is high production vanilla and chocolate work. Weirdly, we don't see that happening yet. Residential vinyl window manufacturers are doing great, right? They have a good handle on their market. They're all, I would say, doing very well. The IRA has helped them, and all the energy efficiency and just the cycle. How homes need to have windows changed right now, and I think that's helped a lot. But on the custom side, on the commercial side, we've seen lots of failures of the heavy engineered product companies, and the vanilla and chocolate guys are doing okay for now, but I don't think that they can rest on the fact that they are, because I honestly feel if there's somebody in a foreign country with cheap labor that wants to attack a market, it's going to be coming up with the idea. And I probably shouldn't broadcast this, but it's probably going to come up with the idea of, here's standard sizes, finishes, and glazing. You can buy these windows with a limited number of accessories without customizations for very cheap. And that will hurt those guys a lot.
How do you view whole window assemblies versus buying insulated glass uniquely? And the fact that many domestic IGU fabricators have maintained business and thrived here locally. Do you see that coming? Is this just going to be a ripple effect?
I think the margins in fabricated glass, unless it's, you know, very value added, so you have multiple value added parts of an assembly. I see it as something that's highly automated, whether it's here or overseas, and the margins are a smaller percentage of the raw materials. So labor is a much smaller percentage, and it's easier for them to compete if they're either very large or if they're very small and have the ability to say, well, we'll just put a lot more sweat equity into everything and even sweat work into everything to just keep the family business going. So you have the real large guys doing well and the smaller local guys doing well. The in-between, I think, is gotten eaten up by, again, the same players, Oldcastle, United, these guys that have gone around and bought the regional guys who covered 5 states, maybe with 2 or 3 plants, Solar Seal, Berkowitz, guys like that have all disappeared. So the mid-sized regional players are gone. But that doesn't mean that, IG units have a safe future. You have to really be on top of the next thing, whether it's investment in production capacity or just investing in the next hot technology like aerogels, vacuum, those things. I think it's going to be tough for those guys unless they really commit to investing in R&D and automation, or more automation, I should say.
What have you seen from the market's perception? And maybe this answer might be different if you're talking about the construction or the design community about importing materials. Do you think there is a perceived lack of quality just because you're getting something at a reduced cost? Or is the primary risk or concern just potential delays or issues if you have manufacturing flaws overseas and then have limitations as to being able to get the material here stateside?
So I was kind of taking some notes in between. It's the end user or whoever's paying for them, right? As kind of design and testing and the type of professionals that we are, we're leading towards quality, right? So we're always going to say, if you haven't done it before, you're not going to practice on us, kind of deal, right? But then you're talking to a client that's developing ultra luxury project, but then can't afford, ultra luxury glazing systems. So then they come back to you and say, well, look, this company from XYZ, they've done it. They're showing me that they've done it. And not until we're able to get in there and show them this is a product that either was specified or that you're using as a basis of design, this is not the same. It looks the same to the untrained eye. But when we visited projects, obviously our background goes a lot more into the consulting and engineering side, but we're working with, Italy, Germany, China, Canada, Caribbean, South America. So we get to see kind of the whole gamut, and we get to talk to the clients at the very early stages where they don't realize what the cost is. And then later on, when they get hit with those bottom lines and they say, I'm saving millions here if I potentially go to what not necessarily it has to be a lesser product, but it's not necessarily apples to apples. And taking notes about what Eliot was saying, labor is different. I mean, we've done it ourselves. We have an engineering team in the DR, and we treat that for not client-facing work, but we quickly realized if we want to be client-facing, if we want to be that flight to quality that you were talking about, Eliot, we said we need to have our constant training with our guys and as much as possible in person. So it's that you described it very well when you said it's either volume, the very big guys, or specialized, the very small guys. The in-betweens maybe struggle differently. In my experience, I'm talking to the same companies that I was talking 20 years ago with the mid-sized guys, right? That they have their products, they have their place, and they're able to manage. Yes, they compete and lose products to some of these larger multinational firms but they have a place in our market. They get to compete. I would say properly. I wouldn't say successfully as they'd want, but they're in there, right? They're not kind of going away anytime soon, though. At least the way I see it.
A couple of things I want to comment on what you just said. When you're talking to an owner or a GC about who they're going to select, and you say you might not be able to get one of those luxury glazers, I do think there is a lot of potential for offshoring and overseas manufacture, and many highly qualified manufacturers and contractors who have an incredible proven track record here and all over the world to execute on projects. What really baffles me, or what I have a hard time wrapping my head around, is how many new suppliers Eliot continues to see funneling through his facility, and how people are willing to take a risk on somebody with no track record, given the complexity and just the liability of the facade and drying in the building and the skin if something goes wrong. So what does that look like, Eliot? Is it an ill-informed developer jumping on the low number that hasn't been burned before? Or do you see that the same developer is willing to take the risk on time and time again? What is it?
So someone once told me it's all aluminum and glass. What makes the difference in engineering and project management? And I believe that's the truth. And, you know, in the old days, we used to hire facade consultants who put the proposed bidders through the ringer, show us proposal drawings. Proposal drawings is not doesn't mean 4 pages of standard details that you put into whatever the job conditions are. Proposal drawings meant, what's your interpretation of our project and what's your solution for our problems, right? And you were supposed to show how you were going to attack different things, of course, without giving away all your secrets. But, you know, that's what we did in the old days. I remember the last major project I was a facade consultant on, which was quite a long time ago. The bidders were Enclose, Perma, all the big guys, right? It was during the recession. You got the big guys to bid this 150,000 square foot job. Like, it was the last one they were going to see for a while, because it was actually. And we had animated renderings, 50 pages from each vendor of proposal drawings, 3D printed. And back then, 3D printing was very, very new. 3D printed parts that they were showing us. I mean, they made an effort to prove that they understood this project, the different systems that were on this project, some high span AESS glass clad steel, some conventional curtain wall, some overhead glazing. Every part of it was addressed to a different degree by the different vendors or the different potential bidders, but that was what we were looking for back then. Today, people look for a name and, you know, and price. I hate to say it, but price trumps everything else right now, unfortunately. It always was important, but no one, the contractors and the owners, especially if they were institutional owners, were not risking a major problem for the next 10 years with a building that leaks or didn't function on an unknown entity or brand. Today, you know, I hate to bring this up, but there's 500 guys out there saying that they're Schuco fabricators. Of course they are. And I've seen Schuco fabricators in a garage that you would park a car in, fabricating Schuco to build windows for Mrs. whatever's house in Romania, because they're the small town Schuco guy. But, you know, if you trade on that name alone and not your ability as a project management company, fabrication company, installation company, there's a difference. And that's the European model that we better get used to here in the United States, not to just look at, is it a W, is it an S, is it a whatever. You have to look at the people who are fabricating it, engineering it, and installing it, and understand that they could have the best designed product in the world, but if it's the execution of the project is not the same as the design of the system.
What you just said, how price trumps everything right now, do you see that changing anytime soon?
It always does after a recession. So when the recession comes and people start to look at their carrying costs, and their maintenance. If you bought a $5 million condo and all of a sudden the wall's leaking, the elevator doesn't work, all of a sudden you're starting to go back and say, hey, that developer the developer who sold us this piece of crap, we're going to go after them. And that's I hate to say it, but the litigation is the only thing that changes people's minds in the US. Different in Canada, although I am seeing them changing in the biggest cities like Toronto. They're also not, they're less litigious, so there's less impact for buying cheap. But yeah, that's what's going to do it. And Manny's in the market that knows this better than anyone. What changes the way we do things is lawsuits and huge settlements. That's what changes people. Not because they feel proud of what they're building. I once worked for a developer in New York City, and he was a can I say asshole on the podcast? He was an asshole. Everyone hated him. He was this big South African ex-Marine, and he was an ass. But I got to tell you, every inch of that building had his name on it, and he felt like if he didn't build the lobby, the floor in the kitchen, the hinges on the cabinetry, he was looking at every one of those details, and he was not allowing anything less than the best. And I respected him. Everyone else hated him, but I really respected what he was trying to do, which was build the best quality he could. And he sold that to people, and people understood it because he was selling it to them, not the big real estate sales firms. It was him. He was meeting with the big buyers who were buying the penthouses and the 3 bedrooms. The showroom, the model was in his building. You went to his building with the real estate agent, and he was telling you why his building was so good. I wish we had more of that. I wish we did.
I'm a little more cynical, unfortunately. You probably saw from my face. I don't think we're gonna fix it. There's always going to be new developers. There's going to be the old guys that learned their lesson, and they're either not around or they're not going to make that mistake again. But there are new guys that say, well, I see this developer. He got to do this, that, and the other. And he's been working with this architect for the last 20, 30 years. And when I talk to that architect, they say, this is what we've done for the last 30 years. We're not going to change it. So there's number one, there's something that Eliot said a couple of times, which is people. And it's amazing to imagine that you have a multinational, glazing contractor that can do fabrication and installation and design, and you still realize that doesn't matter if they don't have the right people, and especially forward-facing people and decision makers, right? So there are teams that I work with that if it's a bespoke system, I know that I'm not going to recommend that company because that's not they don't have the appetite for that, right? Versus there's other firms that I go, this guy loves to design new systems and he's going to take XYZ proper risks. So that is a big deal. As Eliot was saying, as people retire, as people move out, they sell out, that's going to have a big impact on our market more than what prices are going to be whatever anybody agrees to pay for them. I'm just afraid that, in fact, I'm living it, and it's a big part of our market is people 20 years later are making the same mistakes that they made 20 years ago. And you would think, you're like, but you should have learned this before. And it turns out that when they do go to litigation, it's not a matter of who was right or wrong, it's just who the attorneys were able to convince should pay, right? So the true failure mode is not really found in litigation. It's just a matter of, hey, look, you're agreeing to pay this much because we could demonstrate to a jury that you're more responsible than this other party, right? So, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we don't get into litigation. I can't do black and white and say, it was that guy that messed up, knowing that there's a full design that was incorrect. There's ownership decisions that were incorrect. There's execution that was incorrect by multiple players. We'd rather just come in and say, look, we can help you fix all these issues and go into retrofit work than having to say, yeah, go after that guy. He's the weakest link kind of deal. There's also something that you mentioned about, in your market, it's harder to kind of be a gatekeeper to a lot of this stuff. So we get all the calls, again, European companies coming into Florida, let's say. And we're able to hide behind the product approval process and the cost of that, right? So we have our in-house gatekeeping mechanism that as soon as you tell them, look, it's easy, just go in, design your system, go in, do testing and spend this much on cups and then go into approval. And then you can start selling. Then that kind of weeds out the ones that aren't serious about it, right? But even then you do find the ones that have the backing and have the funds. And the client will ask us, look, I need you to vet these guys. I need you to kind of put them, like Eliot was saying, through the ringer. And we're able to essentially the owner has to make the final decision, because if it's cost, it's not our money, right? I can't go in there and say, hey, so-and-so, I tell you, don't mess around with these guys. You're going to get in trouble. And I've got clients that I've even told them, how much are you saving? Put that away for when they fail, right? When their aluminum finishes fail, when their joint sealants fail, when their glass fails, have enough money to replace it all. And if you're okay with that, go ahead with these guys, but expect that you're going to spend more money and more time getting them to do it right, and then potentially fixing it after it fails, basically. So that's as much as we can do. But as far as thinking that we're going to have a shift on people looking for less cost, I don't see a world where the guys that are developing would go into. If we're doing institutional work, hospitals and schools, it's a different conversation altogether, obviously. But for buildings that are being turned over, it's not the nature of that business, basically.
Do you notice a quality difference in condo versus rental buildings distinctly?
Absolutely. It's an unwritten fact, basically, that you ask, will this be condo, will this be rental? And for us, it's our local Florida statute, it's the 558 statute. By default, there's going to be a turnover process at the end, and there's going to be a blast of claims against anybody and everybody that was on that condo. So everybody is doing as much due diligence as possible. But even on those, I find that when I talk to architects and developers, I go, you don't want to do this. It's going to fail, and it's going to fail where it's visible, because something that fails 20 years later, it doesn't make it onto that claim. But anything that you can quickly see, a paint failure, a crack in a material, some kind of delamination, that obviously leaks, that will trigger those initial turnover claims. And there's ways to prevent them, but obviously we don't get every single project. We're a small team. And then we come into projects after the fact. In fact, there's some developers that are hiring us after they've kind of tried out different consultants. And I had written down Eliot's phrase of tribal knowledge. I mean, it's something you're not going to learn at school. It's something you're not going to find in the books. It's something you're not going to find in the building code. So we'll be in meetings with, like I said before, really good engineers from different countries. And what we'll find in these meetings and these design workshops is we'll bring up something where they go, I didn't know that. Okay, we'll go back and revise. They'll come back with something that makes us go, we hadn't thought about that. So there is you won't know everything, but the stuff that we're telling them locally, they had nowhere else to find it. It's not written down anywhere. That this, if you do this, you're going to have trouble, right? Especially with water management, with UV resistance, hurricane resistance, limitations of deflection. I mean, I could go on and on and on of things that aren't specifically called out in any code, that the locals know you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, and that's, it's, I guess it's a blessing and a curse.
Are you, or is the facade consulting design community being asked to or leaned on by developers to do more due diligence on these overseas fabricators?
Yes. Yeah. So the first question is, have you heard of them? And a lot of times the answer is no. The other part is, again, that whole tribal knowledge, it translates the other way around as well. If you look at, I think it's Germany, that you're not allowed to do silicone structurally glazed glass, right? So if you look at any German design, it's captured. And so the level of complexity of that connection doesn't make sense to anybody stateside, right? So that's an upgrade. But for us that we've been doing silicone structurally glazed for decades, we go, oh, Mr. Owner, you're going to spend all this money, you're going to have all these penetrations. There's another way we can have continuous gaskets. Then the vetting goes, like I've had team members going to China to look at their thing. And usually when we're having to make it all the way to the shop, it's because they couldn't convince us with paperwork that they can make it happen, right? So the first step is, let's look at the drawings. And then we start asking the questions, what happens here? What happens there? How do you manage this? And I have gotten the engineering term, don't worry. We've done it before. It's been tested. And I go, that's fine, but your piece of paper says it doesn't work. So show me that you know how to make it work. And again, this is where it goes back to people. It's very refreshing when you sit across from somebody in a design meeting and they speak what we speak. And then immediately you tell the owner, that guy knows what he's talking about. He knows what level of trouble he could get in and get you in. Let's keep talking to that person. Versus
how often do you have those meetings anymore, Manny, where you say that at the end?
It's, you notice when you do, right? You call out the owner and you say, this is a person you can continue the conversation with. And this would almost be like a separate podcast on business management. Is your front-facing person needs to be technically knowledgeable, right? They can't just be a good salesman. They can't just have field experience. They can't just be a good engineer. They need to be able to translate that into this is what you're getting, this is what you're not getting, and this is why X is important versus not. Like just now I'm bidding a job and they came back and said, what about all these other test procedures? And I'm going to call the client and I'm going to say, well, this one's important because this is what's going to go into your lawsuits. That one is good because it's going to give you more comfort. These other ones, this is not even a lead building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, and this is me potentially leaving money on the table, all these tests we could do, but the owner's looking to us to say, is it worth spending our money here? And that's really what we're there for, to make sure that they're making good decisions.
Yeah, I just sent out 3 proposals where we gave alternates to remove some of the testing protocols from mock-ups and told them, listen, we'd rather build the intermediate floor, right, of the 2-story mock-up in concrete because the job's a concrete job. It's not a steel tube simulating a slab. The job is an 8-inch concrete slab at the end. So we'd rather do a small 8-inch concrete slab there, spend the money on that. Maybe you'll lose the seismic and interstory drift, but we can really look at designs we know are proven to do that and see whether or not they're going to work without testing every single one. But the waterproofing and the anchorage that you get for installing a mock-up into the exact substrate that you're going to have on the building is tremendous, tremendous. This is off topic, but we just see so many people that are so focused on this is the way we've always done it that want to just keep doing it the same way. And we keep questioning, well, why is that important to you that we put a steel tube there? Let's put the concrete there. The job's a concrete job. And you know, you mentioned something about the approval process in Florida. I wish the industry organizations worked harder to make sure that not only is a label on a window a code requirement, but that the people who are responsible at the building departments, the architect, the inspectors, the commissioning agents understand and enforce those requirements, because that would also help the domestic manufacturers to, you know, have a little more time to figure out what they're doing, to be honest with you, because save them, it's not going to save them. The fact that they've had the ARMA labeling program for 5 decades and really it doesn't get enforced much on the commercial level, if at all. Manny, when's the last time they said to you, did you see the ARMA labels on the window? Because it's in the code. It's in chapter 17 of the code, the international code, not the Florida building code, not the New York City code. The IBC requires that you see a label on these windows. Maybe 3 to 5% of the windows that are being installed in New York City have labels on them. The rest of them technically are not legal to be sold and installed in my market. And I'm sure yours is the same.
And I was going to say that's a good to your, I think your original question about 40 minutes ago, Adrian, was what do you see in you know, domestic versus overseas manufacturing? I think that's a key, just call it a key factor, is if there was enforcement. Number one, if there was a let's call it a procedure to get into our market, right? That doesn't mean I sell aluminum and glass and gaskets, but I also meet these, let's call them experience requirements, as if you had specs, basically, you know, X amount of years doing this work kind of deal. But then what I found was that, you know, people, going back to that tribal knowledge, people are good on things that they have done before, right? So if you look at a set of specs, like even now, I get down here, somebody's trying to limit glass deflection to 1 inch. You can't limit glass deflection to 1 inch in South Florida with hurricane force winds. You can limit it for everything else, but if you try to limit it for Category 5 hurricane, this is your thickness of your glass piece, right? So the person that's making that limitation is not wrong. That's what the industry tends to say, and that's what they'll say everybody everywhere else in the world, but you can't really make that limitation to South Florida. So if you're able to say, like Eliot was saying, here's the code requirement, and you make it enforceable, now that's how you tell the owner, oh yeah, I know you like those guys and their price, but they haven't gone through this process. Have them go through this process, then talk to them. And that's what we end up having to do down here. It's the owner doesn't spend time or waste time with somebody that cannot demonstrate that they either gone through the process or can prove that they can actually successfully go through that testing process. It takes it takes it off the hands of the consultant. It takes it off the hands of the owner, and it puts it back on the hands of the authorities having jurisdiction. That they are here really protecting our market.
It gives you a tool to protect the owner with, right? Yeah, and it has to have teeth, because honestly, even the certification programs that are out there, they've all gotten diluted in the last 10 years. I'll tell you, from the testing standpoint, you used to have to retest your windows every 5 years, right, for labeling. Then it went to 10 years. Now, technically, you don't have to ever retest. Once you test once and are in a certification program, you can just fill out an affidavit that says we made no substantial changes to the design of our window this past year. I'm filling out the application and sending in my $3,500 for that product, and I can keep buying the labels every year. In our business, there's no two jobs that are built exactly the same. Never mind the product stays the same year in and year out. So we need, and listen, I get it. Everything is a business, and one program has to stay competitive with another. Or you have to go out there and educate the people who are the specifiers and end users of these products on why it's important that you look for that label and why this program is guaranteeing you better quality, or at least assuring you better quality than that one, or not having a label at all, why this is important. And honestly, again, I hate to dump on the industry, but the industry is doing this to themselves. They are ignoring the organizations they set up to keep quality levels high and keep low-end manufacturers out. Those organizations are nothing compared to what they used to be. When I was getting into the industry and really getting involved with things, it was so much more stringent and so much more important. I keep going back to AMA labeling, but AMA labeling was, you couldn't bid work if you didn't have AMA labels on your windows. You had to have a certified report and labels on those windows to be able to even be considered. And why isn't that happening anymore? Because with the millions of dollars people pay to these organizations every year, none of it's being spent on getting out there and pushing for the fact that here's, as you, the consumer, the end user of that product, is benefiting from our program because of this, this, and that. It's just not happening. So you open the door for foreign products to come into the market where they can say they're just as good as the ones you make.
Right, but what good is a thorough spec if it's not enforced? So you might list all of these American test standards that may hinder certain from entering, but if they go to the bid process and some guy that's not qualified comes in at the right price, then the owner might disregard the spec. So how do you get the project team to stay true to it?
Well, when it comes to certification and labeling, that's in the building code. So, Manny has the ability to go back and say, this product's not legal. I can't sign this job off if they don't have a TAF on this, or they don't meet that. I can't sign this off. So you have to be aware, and you have to know that I won't be signing that off. Maybe you can find someone who will, but it won't be us.
It's also that, number one, not every project is going to have a facade consultant, right? You're going to have GCs that have been around long enough, and developers that have been around long enough that they have their own internal team, so they can manage their own risk. But it's to Eliot's point. We have sections of the code. If I think of structural glazing recertification, that's been on the code since forever, and it doesn't get enforced. So the mere humans down, the mere mortals down here aren't going to be able to twist anybody's arm to do one way or another. However, say I think of below grade waterproofing. My team gets trained on when does it apply. There's two times where it actually applies, and there's no choice. So the owner might spend $500,000 to $1 million+ just on the low grade waterproofing. The chance that they're able to not do that, they're not going to do it because it's a lot of money for something nobody's ever going to see, and they don't even know if it's going to fail or not. So we're able to go back and say, look what the code says. You're not allowed. And then they come back and say, what the code says. Here's your geotech report. Here's your water table. Blah 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 blah. You're not allowed. And until they break through those two code sections, it doesn't matter how much money they're trying to save. They can't. Right. So to Eliot's point, if it's something that is in the code, then you're able to say, sorry, Mr. Owner, it's not us as the consultant being risk averse. It's a code issue right now, right? And unless you're gonna then throw it back on the building official, which down here most of them are trying to stay out of major decisions like this, other than following the code to the T, they're not gonna enforce it. But if you ask them the question, I'm gonna say, sorry, follow the code. I never told you to do it, but there it is. You just showed me.
Okay, so we can talk about.
I'll give you an awesome example: bird-friendly glass.
That's
People
what
either love it or hate it. But let me tell you something, you are not building a building in the cities that have adopted it without having it in that job. And that was a great move by the glass industry, right, to get this passed. And it really helped domestic manufacturers. I'm sure by now, European companies can do it and everybody else, but man, there was a good run of, you only had, I remember the first couple of years, there was only 3 manufacturers everyone was going to, because people didn't even know what the bird-friendly glass was at the beginning. And they've done an awesome job of getting that in the code, making sure it's enforced, getting out there and educating architects, engineers, specifiers on why it's important. It's a model of what has to happen on everything else.
Right, but we could talk about enforcement of code, but also effectiveness. And bird friendly kind of hit us, sideswiped us, and or hit us with the right hook, and we weren't expecting it. But yes, a lot of people are implementing it, but is all of it code compliant? I don't know if all of it is actually meeting the required threat factor. And then the question is anybody actually going back and checking? So Eliot, you and I always talk about special inspections and if technical or TR documents are being signed off without actual true inspections, but is anybody actually enforcing or monitoring any of this?
So that's where the industry organizations come in, and they can put money behind making sure that A, people get educated, B, they get trained, and C, there is some motivation for people to know that if you don't follow the code, there will be consequences, meaning, again, litigation. We will go to that building and say, you know, your building's not in compliance. This is the wrong glass. And unfortunately, it sounds like a terrible way to conduct business. But if you want to protect your business, well, you better get out there and make sure people understand that there will be a cost if you circumvent the law.
But again, I feel like the oldest one. I mean, I'm the youngest one in the room, and I'm cynical. Any special inspector you look at, if you look at the code, I think structural is what makes it on there as part of the special inspector's requirements. We take it above that. We look at structural. We look at air and water infiltration. So we're looking at anchorage, sealants, et cetera, and tie down. I'm not looking at tints on glass, right? So as a special inspector, that is a non-structural component. It's a thermal aesthetic component. That's something that the architect, when they're doing their walkthroughs, have to make sure, and they're looking at the purchase orders. And obviously, that's something that should have gotten addressed during, obviously, design, right, and shop drawings. I obviously have zero experience right now with bird-friendly glazing, but it sounds like, Andrew, that the code itself isn't clear on how to reach the compliance. Is that what's happening?
There's a minimum threat factor that you have to meet, and what is it, Eliot? 25, I believe. And so, some glass configurations fall below and fall above, and it's basically how effective the either frit pattern or whatever it is at stopping incidents or birds from impacting the glass. And so some bird-friendly patterns, configurations might comply in Toronto or Chicago, but might not comply in New York. And so I've seen incidents where they've installed glass and later, after the fact, they realize we just put on bird friendly that doesn't actually comply with the law. So asking Eliot, is anybody actually back checking or going around and monitoring what's going in?
I haven't seen anyone, but I haven't seen anyone going really take child fall prevention. We're supposed to have limit devices or bars in windows to keep kids from falling out of windows. And honestly, how many people are going and checking that? Till recently, right? I'm a member of the Chapter 17 Code Revision Committee at New York City DOB, and I didn't realize that there is a line in the building code that requires that windows have an approved limiting device. In this case, tested to ASTM. New York City has their own test that's above and beyond the ASTM one, so we've got to fix that. But it's in there. How many people are actually checking that? It's hidden. That's what it is. And, you know, again, education. We have to, as an industry, bring this to people's attention or educate the average architect who also has to specify paint, floor coverings, roofing, everything else has to be specified by that same office. I'm sorry about the noise, guys. They're building stairs outside my window. But that same architect is responsible for so many thousands of items. How can you expect them to be knowledgeable on this? And that's why it is important, depending on the size of the job, to have a facade consultant, because a facade consultant can tell you about these things that aren't common knowledge.
You're talking about windows that the opening is lower than your safeguard height, I'm assuming, right? And you need fall protection in that case?
No, an operable window that limits the amount of clearance the operable sash will open so that basically nothing falls through the opening.
Yeah, in
So
New York City, it's all operable windows.
But did you do full height operable windows? So you do them all the way down?
No,
sometimes do,
every
but even
operable.
smaller ones, you need some type of limit device. And per Eliot, it's supposed to be, it's supposed to be DOH or Department of Health stamped and approved as basically a structural member that what will stop the window or limit the window from traveling a certain distance.
So we have that, but we do have it when the window is less than a certain height. There's no way around it. And then obviously, if you do a lot of project got encasement, so you're afraid of the whole smack open kind of deal. So that's also another limitation. This went by fast.
Yeah, I think I was going to say I was going to end on Eliot's pitch for usually it's the other way around, but Eliot's pitch for Manny as a facade consultant. But yeah, I guess we should end there. This was fun. Thank you both for joining, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
I pitch for all facade consultants because I tell people we'll get there once or twice or 3 times on a job. Those guys are there every week or every day. We find things, they see what's going on the job, and they'll see the failures that we find and be able to say, it's happening on the east elevation on the 3rd floor. I don't know that. We just test the window. These guys are the ones that really safeguard the fact that you're going to have a building that leaks or doesn't. It's not us. The test doesn't guarantee you that. It's trained eyes.
Man, yeah, I would just smile and end on a win there.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. Great talking to you.
Thank you both.
You guys.